Jai Sudha everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Vihangam Yoga Global Online Forum. My name is Abhinav, joining you once again from Sydney, and once again today we'll be going through the same topic, or another part of the same topic as last week, to do with how we reconcile business and spirituality. Before we go back to our conversation with Sri Simant from Kenya, who we've been really lucky to have over the course of these discussions on this topic, I just wanted to shortly reflect on the importance of this particular topic to not only all of our listeners, but even us, the people who are, trying to bring this topic to you. When we step out of the door every day, we have a choice in the way in which we act. And when you step out of the door, we're probably not stepping out the door right now, but when you log onto your machine, we all have a particular role. Whether it's as a student, as a professional, as a guardian. Everyone has a different position and different thing that they do with most of their time in life. Now, when we enter that world, each of those worlds have their own conventions, their own rules. For example, if we go to a restaurant and we're working as a waiter or a waitress, there's a particular set of rules and conventions which dictate how you should treat a customer, how you should speak to the people who work in the kitchen, how you should speak to your boss, your manager. And there's different kinds of roles within, that world. So in the same way, in each of our lives, we are bound to certain rules and conventions. If you're a student, you're not going to get up in the middle of class and start, singing a song, hopefully, let's say, because there's a certain convention or a certain accepted rule around how you should behave. So as we go through life, we pick up these rules, we pick up these things, and we become very comfortable within them. And as we go deeper into life and we start to discover what spirituality is about, we realize that spirituality has a very defined way of looking at how you should behave all the time. You should always be kind, you should always be patient, and this is where there sometimes is a conflict. The rules you've learnt for how you should act in a business environment, sometimes they don't seem to make sense when you look at the way in which you're being taught to act from your spiritual life. So when we try to bring these two worlds together, many of us struggle. And when we start to struggle in that way, not only do we become very confused, sometimes, we react in different ways. For some of us, we just say, there is a line. This is my spiritual life. This is my professional life. But this is where things get really tricky. The reason why you can't draw a line is because spirituality is about your inner being and who you are on the inside. And obviously, that has a very deep effect on what you do on the outside. So, if we don't figure out a way to bring these two worlds together, that conflict and that inability for us to figure out how our inside and our outside should be aligned can mean that when we look back on our day, we feel like we could have done better. We could have been more patient, or we could have been a little more stern with someone because that was what was required in that moment. So, before we switch over now to, that same conversation with Simant, he expressed last week, just as a quick summary, we started talking about the principles of spirituality and how spirituality itself says there's different principles with different environments. So this week we actually start to dig into a few little things, mainly around decision making, which I've personally found very helpful for myself. And I want to allow you all to now, be able to take that in We have a slightly shorter session today, so it's short and to the point. As most conversations with Simant GI, he's a very clear-minded person. So let's meet again in about 15 to 20 minutes, and let's see what we learned. So over to Simant now. Over to me first, who's going to ask a question, and then we'll hear from Simant. So I hope you enjoy this session. And there's one other thing that um, I find is very hard, even in my own personal life, which is the business world is very fast. So we have these tough decisions taking place. We have these differences in principles that we're trying to reconcile. And then on the side, we're getting pulled into all these different meetings with different clients. We have to take quick decisions. We have to, take a call. So that's completely at odds with what spirituality teaches, which is to be still and to be calm and to be, serene like the ocean in a sense. So what are your reflections on that, and how do you personally live through that? Because I find when I come home and I'm able to meditate, I feel great afterwards, but then as soon as I switch my laptop on, immediately 10 things come to mind, and you're pulled into this other place again. So how do you reconcile that in your own personal life?
Yeah, so one thing which I try to do is I don't try to pull very fast critical decisions. Okay, um, I used to be very impulsive in my 20s and used to work a lot on gut feel, um, which I think is also fine, because you also um, grow in your personality, as you move up. And I realize that now that I'm 40, I realize that my way of thinking and doing things are very different now as compared to when I was in my 20 or my 25 or my 30s, right? So and I think that you should not try to orchestrate your personality too much. Okay, you should also allow yourself to learn through your mistakes. Because if you try to orchestrate everything beyond a point of time, okay, you would see that you are actually somewhere sort of succumbing yourself, your true nature. Okay, so you should I think that yes, you should learn from other people's experience, but if you really feel strongly about something, and it at times there could not be a very mathematical logic to it. It's basically your gut feel to feel the, do things in a certain way. And if you to your logical reasoning believes that yes, I should take a shot, I still encourage all youngsters that yes, you should take a shot. But what you should add to it, which I've learned in my experience over a period of time, comes from Swarved again, where Swamiji says that yogi iksha jo kare pratham vivek vichar. Okay, he says that if, because you're a spiritual meditation practitioner, okay, and you are you're someone who's trying to be a yogi, right? He says that before you do something, prathama vivek vichar. Okay, spend some time, okay, and deep dive deep dive into what you want to do, why you want to do it, how you want to do it. That is Pratham Vivek Vichar. And then he says that Binu Vichar ke kasht hai, hum dukh hota pa. If you just land into something, okay, without thinking, without deliberation, without brainstorming, you can brainstorm, with people around you. That's what I do. Okay, that when you work in an organization, you try to create an organization where you think that you're working with people who are smarter than you. Okay, then you've actually delegated a lot of good thinking process to more talented people around you. So that's what I try doing. I try to throw a lot of things to my managers, and uh, cross check their thoughts or what they believe. I do that with my counterpart Vandana, because I've realized that a lot of people can have got better emotional quotient, okay, have got better logical reasoning, um, and you should leverage on the talent of people around you, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your children, whether it's your managers, whether they are accountable. There's nothing, huh? Three magic letters that I've that I've really learned in the last 5 7 years, okay, because previous to that it used to be different, is ask. ASK. Okay, there is nothing wrong in asking people around you, okay, about what they think about something. Okay, this is not about you don't know, is basically about the fact that you could just land into a revelation just because you've asked. Okay, and that's what Savit also says, be a jigyasu. What you don't know, ask. Even if you know, take more perspective in your life. And that has really helped me in the last, I think, 7 8 years, being open for looking at better suggestions, different thinking process for people around you. So think before you make a decision. Okay, this I at times I haven't done that, okay, in the past, especially in my 20s. And there are times I sort of paid a price for those mistakes. um, but I think those every time I go back and think about some of these um, decisions I took, I realized that there was no decision making in that process. It was just that I wanted to do it, I did it, but I never thought about it, right? So this two lines in Swarved brought a lot of revelation. Yogi iksha jo kare pratham vivek vichar. You think about it and do it, because if you have thought about it, you brainstormed about it, if you've deep dived into it, okay, you have made a conscious choice. Once you made a conscious choice, even if something goes wrong, you know that, okay, we thought everything. Okay, there are two things I didn't think we didn't go right, let's say. Okay. But you learned something out of it. And I think that's your return on investment, that experience, that comes with it.
Yeah. I must ask though, um, as a person who struggled with this in the past, when do you stop thinking and actually take the decision? Because sometimes people deep dives for so long that they just become paralyzed, right? Where they have so much information, so many options that it's like, okay, now I'm like on the other end of the spectrum where, rather than not thinking at all, I'm thinking too much. So what does the master and what does your personal experience kind of say in respect to that? Like, do you think there's for yourself, do you have like a line that you draw, like, okay, this is enough information and now I'll take the decision? Or like, how do you go about it?
So I look at it, is it a big consequence decision? That's how I try to put the frame. Okay. Um, so let me give you an example. Let's say that if we are about to get into a big customer acquisition discussion, right? And we only have, how time sensitive it is. Okay, is it like I've got 10 days time to respond, to clear it, or I've got 2 days time? So depending upon how time sensitive the matter is, number one, and number two, is it a big consequence decision? Because if it is a big consequent decision and it is time sensitive, I would not spread the thought process to many people. I would probably have 2 3 people, um, probably the senior people in the organization, involved in the process. And we set a timeline and we pull ourselves out, okay, from other I would say inconsequential things for the next couple of days, okay, and take a timeline and make a decision. But when we get into that kind of situation, okay, or there are times when let's say, okay, in our world, if there's a big court hearing about to happen in 1 week's time. And we know that this is something um, that can put a company under liquidation or a receivership, right? Which is basically that you're going to go bankrupt. Then I know that we are now part of something that's going to have a very big consequence. And again, the reason why I look at it, not because the company is going to liquidation, I also look at it, this company runs 500 employees, into 2,000 people are going to be on streets, right? This is how I look at it. Is it a big consequence decision, or is it something which is operational in nature? Okay, if something is operational in nature, I would largely delegate it. Okay, I would largely delegate it. I would prefer, uh, managers and people, who own those processes, okay, to I would say, and there are times I would say they can take the decision. I won't even get involved, right? And there are days I would say that, okay, just let me know how you're proceeding, okay, before you just pull the shot, right? And I would actually not, be at all try to get involved, in the whole process, what you thought and all, because to me it's not something that's going to get my organization down, right? And there are times, you also need to do that, because how are, people in your organization ever going to learn decision making if you're not going to let them, pull the rope at times? And as a, I think, as an entrepreneur, you will never outgrow yourself in your organization if you're not going to allow people in your organization to learn decision making, right? But you give them the same principles what I said, right? Like, I would speak to my managers and tell them that, okay, because I live, in Kenya, and people won't understand, survey in Hindi, but I've actually translated for them, the same thing in English, and I've told them the same thing, that when you come to me for a final discussion, you just make sure that you've deep dived and thought all the five W's and the H. Because once that principle is set, then I'm very relaxed that yes, people have thought through the process, the Vivek and the Vichar part, has been done. So it's highly unlikely, that, people are very intelligent. If you see in this world, people are very, everyone is gifted, everyone is unique. What water can do, gas cannot do, what copper can do, gold cannot do. So if you just also have that perspective that, everyone is unique, no one is dumb, okay, every person is intelligent in his own way, right? You just need to give him the principle. This is the principle. Don't come to my room and discuss about anything that you've not thought about. And once it becomes a culture in your organization, your life becomes simple. Yeah, so I think if I tried answering your question, look at what is a big consequent decision. If it is a big consequent decision, then you need to rope in, a very few people who are capable, to make a mature decision on a big consequence. Don't get the world involved, because then you'll get torn by, multiple opinions at different levels of thinking. You will not be able to reconcile, to make the decision. So keep it to a few people. But other operational matters, you know, you have to allow people around you, to pull the rope, because otherwise, like, if you're the only person in the organization doing everything, to me you're not running an organization, you're still under employment. It's like, if your organization cannot work without you, okay, then it is not an organization. It's basically you. And if you're gone, there is no company, which means that those 200 500 employees again go down. So I think it's just, your thinking process, that you have to allow, your organizations to grow along, with your people around, but set the principles. That's very important. And spirituality, that's why, if you, I want to just add one more thing before I close this question. If you actually go back and see, how various empires were run, in our ancestral times, okay, it's never enshrined, so vocally what I'm about to tell you, but this is how I see it, right? Organizations were run by the kings, okay, the empires were run by the kings, but the principles were actually laid by the rishis, whom they used to call, the kul guru, or, the rajarshi, of that empire, right? Because he would actually set down, the mission and the vision and the values on how the empire should be run. It will be run by the king, but set on the principles, set out, by the rishis. And every time there's a problem, the king will go running, to the rishi. Okay, if there's no rain, okay, so then he'll go to the rishi. The rishi will perform, a certain yagna, okay, for vrishti to happen, and same thing, if there is no food, then he runs back to the rishi, because that rishi knows, how to draw through the higher consciousness of what is required to the empire for right now, because he sets the principles. And no one could go against the principles, not even the king. So I think, that is how any organization should work. You set the canvas, you set the whole playground, and say that these are 5 principles that this organization will never compromise upon. And reiterate it. If you are the patriarch of that organization, you reiterate those spiritual principles in your organization. Look at how Tata works. There are things like you can never think about, Tata bribing anyone in any part of the world to get anything done. But these are an organization with such a cash rich organization. How are they not even bribing a rupee or dollar, to anyone to get things done? Because those principles are enshrined. No Tata guy would ever dare to even have a discussion about it because they know it's not acceptable in my organization.
Yeah, no, totally. I think the point you just the analogy you made to the empire is so interesting because it definitely feels like a lot of the businesses that we work in today have a very strong set of values. When you get interviewed as well, they're checking, are there any red signs that, any alarm bells that are saying this person is not really in tune with our values. And at times on the outside it can feel like, oh, I'm being indoctrinated into some kind of thing. But I feel like, yeah, like as you just mentioned, the more time you spend in those kinds of organizations, the more you realize how important it is for everyone to see eye to eye on those principles. So folks, that's all we've got for this part of this conversation. And I can tell you honestly that when Simant started to talk about decision making, a lot of the things which I saw didn't make sense as a younger professional. They started to make a lot of sense. If you're in a big organization and there's a decision that needs to be made, the term of how to do that, as we heard from Simant today, is something which we almost naturally converge towards in big, not even big, but in organizations. Often when you're a younger professional, you'll kind of be taken aback by the fact that your leadership team may have taken a decision, you weren't part of it, even though you are working so hard, and you start to think, is this really the best way to do things? And in part, as we heard today, that's why your leaders are your leaders, because they are guiding your organization. They're speaking to everyone, they're understanding what's going on, and they're using all that information to help them to take the best decision with the right people. And of course, if you're the right person, and over time you will become that right person, depending on a number of factors, then you'll also be part of that process. So it's very interesting to me personally how, in our pursuit of building really efficient systems in the professional world, we have almost naturally started to, in some parts, converge toward the same principles which we heard today from Simant. And decision making is such an essential part of, any aspect of life, particularly business. And, we heard today about that, about the vibes, the energy a person can bring to the table. How many times have you been in the middle of a conversation with a group of people and, one person is, particularly optimistic, maybe the other three people around you are, but there's one particularly pessimistic person. And it's just in their nature, because of something that's happened with with them in the past. That pessimism affects everyone's optimism. And in the reverse, sometimes everyone's optimism affects the other person's pessimism. To make this simpler, if you're in front of a person who's very negative, that can affect you. If you're a very positive person in front of a negative person, that can affect them in a positive way. So in the same way, when you're taking decisions, as Simant was saying, business is a social enterprise. You're trying to help everyone grow, develop, support their families, their livelihoods. So in the middle of this, place where you think you're, working on this thing, this business, actually all you're doing is you're working with people and you're working together to achieve something. So when it comes to that, this vibes, almost this alignment of energies becomes very important. So you'll often see in bigger, I keep saying bigger, but in organizations that have an understanding of this idea, which is more commonly bigger organizations, let's say, when you are trying to hire a leader or you're going for a leadership position, that interview process is a very long process, and it's a very detailed process where a number of people get involved. And that's because, this alignment of energies becomes more and more important the more responsibility you have. And I think Simonji touched on that today as well. So everyone, I hope you were able to take away something from today as well. A slightly shorter session today, but next week we're back at about 25 minutes of conversation with Simonji. So I hope you're looking forward to that, and that'll be the last part of our 3-part series. But if you do have any questions, please do feel free to drop them in at slido.com/VYGOF, and all of our instructors, including Simonji, will gladly answer those questions. So with that, I want to say thank you all for tuning in again. Thank you for listening, and let's meet again next week. Jai Sudev, and do take care.
सदा फल शांतिमय, शांति शांति सुख शांति।